One ancient king was so terrified of assassination that his daily meals would have instantly killed anyone else at the table. While other rulers feasted on roasted meats and wine, King Mithridates was secretly microdosing the deadliest venoms and toxins known to the ancient world. He transformed his own body into a biological fortress just to survive his own family. But this terrifying culinary routine led to the most ironic, horrifying twist in medical history. Think about the most chaotic family drama you have ever heard of. Now multiply that tension by 1,000, add a heavy dose of lethal toxins, and set it inside a massive stone fortress. That was the childhood reality of Mithridates VI. He was a prince growing up in the Pontic Kingdom, a sprawling empire located right around the dark shores of the Black Sea. For this young prince, the palace was never a sanctuary or a home. It was a highly lethal ecosystem where every single person was a potential threat. The massive vaulted dining halls of Sinope weren't places of celebration. Every banquet was essentially a tense theater of suspicion. The paranoia started early, and it was completely justified. His father, the king, was murdered right in the middle of a massive feast taken out by a poisoned chalice. After that assassination, the young prince's life became a nightmare. His own mother, Queen Laodice, stepped up to take control, and she made it very clear that she favored his younger brother, Mithridates Crestus. She viewed our young prince not as a son, but as a massive, inconvenient obstacle blocking her grip on power. And she didn't just ignore him, she actively tried to have him eliminated. First, his guardians encouraged him to ride horses, but they specifically gave him resistive horses, wild, unpredictable, dangerous beasts, hoping he would suffer a fatal accident. When he proved to be an incredibly skilled rider and survived the horses, the tactics changed to something much silenter. The prince started noticing things. He began to taste the subtle, strange, metallic tang of arsenic mixed right into his morning porridge. He could feel the sudden, unnatural, burning heat of plant toxins hidden in his wine. Imagine the psychological weight of knowing that the very people assigned to protect you are actively trying to poison your food. Every meal was a game of roulette. So what do you do when your own mother is trying to poison your breakfast? You run. He fled the palace and escaped into the wild, rugged mountains of the Pontic region. But he didn't just hide in a cave and wait for things to blow over. For 7 long years, he lived in the harsh wilderness, and he turned that exile into a massive open-air laboratory. He became obsessed. He studied every single toxic plant, every strange root, and every venomous creature he could find along the Black Sea. He tested them, observed them, and learned exactly how they work. He wanted to know which specific berries caused a human heart to stutter and stop, and which roots could drag a person into a permanent death-like sleep. When he finally returned to the palace years later, he was no longer a frightened kid running from assassins. He was an absolute master of venoms. He swiftly took control of the throne, locked up his mother and his brother, and they both eventually died in prison, completely removing them from the board. He was the undisputed king, but the paranoia didn't go away. In fact, it consumed him. He realized that sitting on the throne made him a bigger target than ever. He concluded that the absolute only way to never be poisoned was to become the ultimate poisoner himself. Now, you're probably wondering, how on earth does a person make themselves completely immune to every poison in the ancient world? You don't just wake up invincible. It requires a terrifying daily routine. Stick around, because the cocktail he invented to protect himself is going to blow your mind, and the way he tested it is straight out of a horror movie. Let's look at his daily morning routine. The king created a monstrously complex mixture that he called the Mithridatium. This wasn't some simple herbal tea. It was a thick, potent paste containing between 36 and 54 different ingredients. And its purpose was brutal. It was designed to systematically assault his own body every single day to build a superhuman resistance. Every morning, before doing anything else, he swallowed a carefully measured dose of the world's most lethal substances. We're talking about consuming arsenic trioxide. To build immunity to this, he had to endure constant low-grade inflammation of his stomach, intense nausea, and extreme chronic fatigue. He consumed extracts of aconite, also known as monkshood, which is a terrifying neurotoxin that paralyzes your nerves and causes extreme cardiac arrhythmia. He didn't stop at plants and minerals. He used the venom of the long-nosed viper. To make sure his body absorbed it properly, he would literally scratch the snake venom directly into his skin, suffering through feverish tremors and agonizing joint pain just to force his body to create antibodies. He mixed all of this biological warfare with huge amounts of honey, dried figs, and walnuts just to make it physically possible to swallow. He chose to live his entire life in a permanent state of controlled sickness. But here's where his recipe gets truly bizarre. One of the key ingredients was the dried blood of Pontic ducks. Why ducks? Well, the king noticed that the ducks living in the Black Sea marshes frequently ate highly poisonous plants like hemlock and hellebore, and they were completely fine. He theorized that their blood contained some kind of protective magic or natural antibody that neutralized the toxins, so duck blood went right into the daily paste. But a scientist can't just guess the dosages. If he took too much, he would die. If he took too little, an assassin could still kill him. He needed cold, hard data. So the royal dungeons beneath his palace were transformed into horrific observation wards. The king, along with a secretive group of Scythian shamans known as the Agari, used condemned prisoners as human guinea pigs. They didn't do this to find cures. They wanted to map out the exact mathematics of death. They wanted to find what we now call the LD50, the exact lethal dose required to kill. They would force a prisoner to consume aconite and coldly document how the victim suffered immediate numbness, loss of motor control, and suffocated to death in exactly 22 minutes. They would administer belladonna and watch the victim's pupils dilate massively as they fell into an intense hallucination and delirium. They even watched the horrifying effects of stingray venom, noting how quickly it caused a person's organs to fail and their blood to clot. The king would often stand there in the torchlit dungeon, waiting until a prisoner was on the absolute brink of death. Then he would administer a prototype of his antidote to see if the victim could be brought back. Every failure, every agonizing scream provided a new data point to refine the exact dose he would take at his own breakfast table. His entire survival strategy was built directly on top of human misery. Now imagine having all of this dark, terrifying knowledge at your fingertips. You wouldn't just use it to protect yourself, right? You would weaponize it, and that's exactly what Mithridates did. He hated the Roman Republic with a burning passion and fought 3 massive, brutal wars against them. During these conflicts, he didn't just use standard armies. In the year 88 BC, he orchestrated an event known as the Asiatic Vespers. This was a massive, synchronized attack on Roman citizens living across his territory. But he didn't just send soldiers with swords. He used his supreme knowledge of toxins. Local elites were secretly supplied with Pontic poisons. They invited Roman administrators to massive feasts and served them tainted wine and drugged food. In a single day, between 80,000 and 150,000 people were slaughtered, many of them completely incapacitated by poison before the violence even began. It was an act of biological warfare on a scale the ancient world could barely comprehend. He even used the local wildlife against the Romans. There's a specific type of honey in his region called mad honey. It's produced by bees that feed on toxic rhododendron flower, and eating it causes your heart rate to drop massively, leaving you essentially paralyzed. During one military campaign, the king ordered his men to leave massive, tempting honeycomb full of this mad honey right in the path of an advancing Roman army. The hungry Roman soldiers found the honey, gorged themselves on it, and collapsed. The king's forces then simply swept in and slaughtered the incapacitated troops. The man was a tactical genius when it came to toxic warfare. But history has a very dark sense of humor. Fast forward decades later, the king is now 70 years old. His massive empire has finally crumbled. He's trapped inside a citadel on the Crimean Peninsula. The Roman armies are outside the gates, ready to break in. And to make matters worse, his own son has betrayed him to the Romans. He knows exactly what's going to happen next. The Romans are going to drag him back to Rome, put him in chains, and parade him through the streets as a captive trophy. He refuses to let that happen. He decides to take the only honorable exit he has left. He gathers his 2 daughters and pulls out a small vial. This is his absolute masterpiece. It's a highly concentrated extract of hemlock and aconite that he always kept hidden right inside the hilt of his sword for an emergency. Just like this, he gives the poison to his daughters, and it is incredibly effective. They die instantly, collapsing right in front of him. The poison works perfectly. Then, the king raises the vial to his own lip and drinks the rest. Under normal circumstance, that dose would have killed a dozen grown men. He sits there, waiting for the end. He waits for the cold numbness to start creeping up his feet. He waits for his vision to dim and his heart to finally stop. But nothing happens. He starts pacing rapidly around the room, trying to force his blood to circulate, desperately trying to give the extreme toxins a chance to work. But his liver, which has been rigorously trained by 50 straight years of daily chemical assault, simply shreds the poison. His internal enzymes recognize the lethal molecules immediately and neutralize them with industrial efficiency. The universal antidote he swallowed that very morning worked way too well. He had spent his entire life building a biological fortress to keep his enemies out, and now he realized he had inadvertently trapped himself inside it. He was literally unkillable by his own hand. As the soldiers began to batter down the doors to his inner sanctum, the greatest toxicologist of the ancient world found himself completely out of options. He was forced to turn to his Gaulish bodyguard, a man named Bituitus, and beg for the mercy of a sword. The king who had mastered the invisible, complex arts of venoms and roots was forced to die by the clumsy, violent bite of iron. The Romans eventually stormed the citadel, but when they found his body, they didn't just take his gold. They were terrified and fascinated by him, so they stole his personal notebooks and the recipe for the Mithridatium. That recipe was copied, modified, and used by kings, emperors, and queens for nearly 2,000 years. It became the most famous medicine of the elite, living on long after the Roman Empire itself fell to dust. Mithridates created a legacy of survival that changed history, but he paid the ultimate price for it. He lived a life of total paranoia, isolated from everyone, tasting fear and poison in every single bite he took. So, the next time you think your family gatherings are a little tense, just remember, at least you don't have to build an immunity to arsenic to survive dinner. I hope you enjoyed this crazy story from history. Let me know what you think in the comments, and stay curious. See you in the next one.